Hi, Bart. So, I wanted to talk a bit today about dry fasting. Now, it's something this is becoming more popular at the moment. It seems to be getting more traction on YouTube videos online right now.
Yeah,
Could you explain perhaps what it is and why people use it at the moment?
yeah, sure. Dry fasting is a mode of fasting where not only food intakes but also fluid intakes are restricted or are disallowed in the case of dry fasting. The idea behind it is that in denying yourself the intake of water, you require your body to increase the production of metabolic water to offset that loss of fluids every day. And as such, that chews through your fat more rapidly to produce that water. It also seems to be associated at around about a certain time point with resetting of the immune system, autophagy, and etc. It seems to be that fasting without any intake of food for several days at a time was probably something that we did, I suggest, ancestrally. But I doubt very much that we actually undertook much dry fasting. I mean, pretty much there was water around and people probably drank water when they were thirsty, I imagine. So it is a hack. It is something that's been added to our list of tools, I guess, recently. Um,
Mm.
it has its uses. I don't know. What do you want to know about
So,
it specifically, I guess?
yeah, so I guess specifically, how would someone, assuming they wanted to do it, how would they start doing it and what might the pros and cons be?
Right. Yeah. Okay. I think a person that wants to do dry fasting should start with no more than probably a day to start with for the first several times and have several days in between repeats so that your body can kind of get used to it. Um, in practice, how do you dry fast? Well, you just don't eat any food or drink any fluid of any kind, including water. You keep yourself distracted for 24 hours doing something else, I guess, and probably have someone keep an eye on you. It's always good to have someone that's just watching out for you to make sure that everything's on the up and up.
Yeah. Okay. I know people have tried before and have maybe not been too successful. In that they've either had like heart arrhythmias, things like that. Perhaps there's different illnesses where you shouldn't actually undertake it.
Mm.
What are some of the key things someone should look at in terms of like their bodily function in order to make sure they do it safely?
Right, yeah. I mean, I guess so long as you're feeling okay, that's probably a good sign. If there's any dizziness, um, like a sense that you're going to black out when you stand up, sort of thing, if there's really intense thirst, if your urinary output stops completely for more than 12 hours or so, would be a possible cause for concern, or at least to give you pause to think about it. Um, if your blood pressure does something crazy, that's a potential possibility. Mm, I think they're the main ones. Generally, if something's really
Yeah,
off, you know. So
yeah. I think
while
people. Yeah,
it's uncomfortable, absolutely, to be doing dry fasting, and you should feel comfortably uncomfortable. It's a challenge. It's a stress. You'll feel thirsty. You'll keep getting impulses to drink. That's okay, so long as you're feeling okay. Maybe you're frustrated. Maybe you're but it's if you're actually unwell, I guess.
sure. Yeah, yeah. I think someone would have to be quite masochistic in order to go past that point. When you feel really horrendous. I know a lot of people that would do that just because they want to be the big man and do it for 3 days straight, 5 days straight, or anything like that.
Yeah.
How many days did you do it for in the past? I know you tried to run an experiment, but you kind of showed us that there's a safe way to do it, and you had your own parameters of what is and isn't acceptable in terms of
Yeah.
like your own health status
Yeah,
in that moment of time.
I had several parameters in mind where if my physiological parameters went outside a certain range, then I would pull the plug, irrespective of how I felt, purely on an overly conservative safety point of view. And I have found personally that if I try to dry fast more than about 3 days, that I start to really suffer. Other people seem to be able to go longer. Well, bully for them. It's just my personal experience. My body doesn't like to go without exogenous fluid intake more than about 3 days, 3.5 max.
Mm. Would you say it's more useful for fat loss? Because I know people nowadays, they want to break into that, food mass deficit as hard as they can sometimes for a particular event at a certain point in time. Is it more valuable perhaps than like a water fast, or is it just a water fast is more sustainable, or what would you personally recommend, or is it case by case?
Well, I don't know how true it is, but I have heard tell that dry fasting seems metabolically to turbocharge the effects of standard fasting by about 3 times. So 1 day dry fasting is thought to be the equivalent of 3 days of wet fasting or water fasting. So if you want to get an effect with some expedience, perhaps, that could be helpful. Of course, the flip side of that is that in doing the thing expediently in that way, you stress your body so much more to the point where the likelihood of it not turning out so well for you increases. But that said, so long as you've got someone looking out for you who understands what to look out for, and you have absolute cut-off thresholds in terms of things like urinary output, blood pressure, parameters, a few other bits and bobs maybe, that you can keep yourself safe, that someone can say, right, you're out of range, and that's the end of it, no discussion. So,
sure, yeah. Yeah. I got one last question on this topic of dry fasting, and that's about how it may or may not affect the basal metabolic rate. So we know that different hormones are upregulated during times of fasting. Growth hormone goes up. Initially, people get a bit hungry because they're not putting in the same amount of fuel in the body at that time. Do you think that long term, if someone was to try something like this, maybe 1 day every week, would that reduce their basal metabolic rate? So they would, in effect, have to continue dieting for fat loss for a lower kind of level of food intake?
Yeah. I don't personally think that any long-term meaningful baked-in effect on your metabolism is expected after a few days of either wet or dry fasting. I'd be very surprised if that occurred. The metabolic rate, the basal metabolic rate, all of that is a plastic thing. It's very trainable, and it depends on inputs as to, what environment are you living in, how are you living, sure. But it's not that quick. It's going to take weeks to meaningfully change your metabolism, I think.
Yeah, I think so as well. Like you said earlier, these are just useful tools that people can use to expedite fat loss and, health remission or disease remission, if that makes sense.
Speaking of useful tools, I love your Follow TED t-shirt, by the way.
Nice, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good.
Where is Ted nowadays?
You too can have a t-shirt just like it if you go to my fine merchandise store, by the way, boys and girls.
Highly recommended.
Ted has been at the camouflage training this morning. Can you tell? Oh, take the hat off. Take the crown off.
Oh, yeah, he's blending right in.
There you go.
That's it. Build muscle and lose fat on the carnivore diet.